how did you first hear about Procreate Project and the Mother Art Prize?
Well, I heard about the Mother Art Prize through a friend of mine who's very engaged in the art world, and she's not a mother. And she said, "Oh, you really should apply for this. You really should. It's really good. Look at who they're working with. Look at the spaces that they're invested in. Look at what they're doing." And I was like, "Oh, do you think so? Surely this is for women who've got small children." That's what I thought. And then, I felt like a bit of a fraud at first when I got in, because I thought, well, I've done the nappies, I've done the running home at 4 o'clock to bake cakes, I've done all the sleepless nights, to a certain extent, although I'm now doing art GCSE and whatever else I'm doing, it does get a little bit easier. It doesn't get any easier in terms of worrying or caring, and I don't think that ever will change, but it does get a bit easier in terms of that you can proportion yourself a bit more time, or give the studio a bit more time as a mother of older children. And so I felt like a bit of a fraud. But then actually, as the process has gone on, so I thought, oh, okay. And then I got in and I realized, well, actually, no, I think all mothers deserve this. I'd advise anyone to apply, even grandmothers, because on reflection, I think like the amount of time and effort that I've put in to being at home, or not being able to go to private views, not being able to go to the Venice Biennale, not being able to make the work that I want to make, because I have had to go to parents' evening, or I've had to go to a concert, or I've had to look after somebody with chicken pox, and I think in conclusion to what I'm saying is that having an art practice for me, and I argued this actually in my project that I did with Dyana, in collaboration with Dyana, which we did during COVID, my argument is that having a child is really no different to having an art practice. Artwork takes mothering on a huge scale. And yes, of course, the consequences are different, but not to the ego. The artwork counts. It really counts. It really means something. And, in the same way that a child might at some critical points. And those things take a lot of time, and women notoriously are underpaid and don't have time.
It's interesting because I think I've mentioned this to you before, Holly, but Renata Bertelmann, one of the artists that we work with, she said that very thing. She's never had kids, but she said that and she actually has a work which is called Her Firstborn Child, but her works have become her babies.
Yeah.
Her children. And it's, unfortunately she wasn't able to have children, but she took all of that energy and that mothering and funneled it into her artistic practice. Unfortunately, she wasn't given a choice to have children because of physical complications, but it is interesting in how you compare the two things in that way.
Yes, and for some people that was very controversial, although when Dyana and I did our project together, and I said, and at first I was going to ask mothers generically about how they felt about mothering, but actually in the end we decided to ask artists how they felt about mothering. And a couple of friends who didn't have children made very big contributions, and their contributions were substantial actually. So I agree with Renata Bertelmann. There are lots of people out there who would find that difficult and would disagree, and that's fine too, but I actually can see how an art practice could function in that way, could function in the way of creating a family, creating a child, creating. And I to that end, I think children are very, very distracting.
I suppose that's a good point back to you, Violet, because as you say, your children have left home. So I guess it's given you more time to refunnel that energy.
Yeah, and I think talking to Holly or listening to Holly, I think a big part of when my kids moved out for the first time in a long time, of course, I'm embracing, oh, now what am I going to do with all this time? I can get into the studio. But it did follow me so much into the studio. And I think when they moved out, for a couple of weeks, I was heartbroken because they moved out together. And I think this sort of idea of like creating children and babies, it was to make up for it. I started filling the house literally with 56 toddlers to infant sculptures. And then they went into, seeing all these sculptures into the painting series of each painting relating to one of the toddlers. So and then thus it went into the Bringing Home Baby series of paintings, which I was very grateful to show in the online exhibition with Richard Saltoun. But as a mother, I think it is when they, even if they're not present, they are always present, and in some ways they do become, they're always first in a way. And so this is where the big conflict, I think, can always arise with a mother and an artist, because being an artist is very, you have to sort of be very self-centered in a lot of ways, or you want to be. And so there's always that pull. And I think that's, when the kids were small, that's what I did find very difficult. For the first number of years, as toddlers, they would follow me around galleries and it was all working out. But after a while, it starts to be really hard when there's ear infections and all of their various problems to divide yourself. And
Dyana, I'd be curious to kind of have you talk us through the last 18 months, because that was a core part of our relationship and how things have changed, not just in terms of the Mother Art Prize, but just in terms of how you guys have had to sort of flex, stretch, rebound. You've been on an emotional roller coaster. And so I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I wanted to, just before I got into it, if you allow me, I would like just to remark that all the challenges that Violet was mentioning are based on the current, but also past, very much past, current, and possibly not future political and cultural scenario, where a lot is requested and lays on its weight on mothers, because we live in a society and in a culture where the mother needs to kind of juggle different responsibilities, and where the theories of attachment are built originally upon the idea of having a village, but very much is not what happens in reality. So all the struggles that they were both talking about, and the fact that they had to be the ones prioritizing their children over their other strands of lives and passions and identity, it's because there are not really the infrastructures necessary to sustain women, to be able to sustain them and being able to keep making art, producing art, without the need of having to compromise on where they want to place their energies, more or less. And I think that this pandemic, going into your questions, has very much remarked this this lack of structure, this lack of support and understanding, and these assumptions that we base our economies, our cultures, and our systems on. And definitely COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted all these discrepancies and inequalities, and what really means having to be retained and isolated into a domestic space without having the capacity, the platform, and the space necessary to really nurture all the other aspects of your being as a woman and as a caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
I know that speaking of that, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but Kate McMillan and Lauren England are doing a lot of research right now, specifically on this. They're doing a lot of surveys with artist mothers or artists who have caring responsibilities to understand how the last year has shaped their lives. And they'll be going again in a couple of months to do another survey to look at how it's the impact of it that's more long term, because of that very thing, that kind of the divide has become deeper and more divisive in terms of, although both male and female parents, or female and female, male were both at home working during the lockdown, the primary responsibility still lay on the woman, even though men were theoretically picking up some of the slack. And there's been, numerous articles about it. Josie Cox has written extensively on it, but it's something that you would have thought would have changed significantly, but actually it hasn't. If anything, it's made that disparity, both in terms of caring responsibilities as well as financially, even deeper. So it'll be interesting to see what these new reports come out with in terms of that.
Yeah, I guess that it's interesting to see that there is an alarmism in a way, and then there has been some attention and focus placed on this. We have been running our surveys, although not in the form of service for 7 years now. We have been looking into domestic and how to bridge that with the public and the professional for a very long time. And everything that has been put under the spotlight during the pandemic, also because we were forced to look at the domestic space, we were literally forced in it, is what has been happening for decades and decades, really already. Definitely the lack of childcare in schools have exacerbated for sure the reality of having to work from home, and also the inability, the financial strains and the inability maybe to access working space or studio space is definitely kind of made it even worse. But what is true, there are some fundamental truths there that were already present and nobody was paying attention to it.
But you as an organization have, which is to kind of give people a quick overview of what Procreate Project does, how it was sort of created and how it's developed. I think it would be quite interesting to hear you just kind of briefly and succinctly sum that up.
Yeah. Well, what Procreate Project wants to do, aims to do, and has been working on for the last 7 years is to create a reference for different models and radical strategies by which we can really maintain the presence, the visibility, and the production of new works made by women and mothers when it comes to, the cultural industries and specifically the visual arts. So we have created, and we're still creating, new models that will offer representation and visibilities, and this comes through exhibitions, the Mother Art Prize, the commissions of new works, and which is what Holly was talking about just before when she was mentioning the project that we worked on together. We're looking at creating studio space that will integrate childcare, and that's something that has been piloted and it's happening. We're hopefully opening this September here in London as a first step for hopefully a much bigger replication of the model. We're looking into push for contents and themes, subject matter within the art that is created that has been over history really overlooked and devalued, and there are all themes related with the maternal experience, with women's experiences more broadly, not necessarily related with having children, but really much largely of the women's body and the politics of it, the reproduction, abortions, and power structures, childbirth, maternal mortality. So all subjects that would have hardly found space on walls of gallery spaces, of art spaces before. And we're trying to really inspire a sea change across sectors, but starting from the cultural one, starting from the arts, to see, changes in the way that we produce work, the way that we sustain practices, the way that we exhibit and represent artists, and the way that we perceive certain subjects, to really offering new narratives, offering new ways of combining these existences and practices. and really embracing into the discourse, but also into the very much into the actions, the fact that caregivers and parents and mothers needs to be active actors in this field, in this industry.
I mean, it's a hugely important organization, and it's, you know, I applaud you for the work that you both do. And I'd be curious to know, Violet, whether there's any kind of comparable organizations or levels of support in Alberta where you live.
Oh, I don't think so. No, I don't really, certainly I haven't heard of anything. I heard of the Mother Art Prize on Facebook, actually. Somebody had posted it. And same with Holly, I thought, well, I am a mother, but it's not affecting my art the way as when you've got little ones at home. But I think I actually contacted the Mother Art Prize and they said, it doesn't matter if they're 108, your children, you go ahead and apply. So, but no, there's nothing, you know, I mean, I think it's wonderful what the Procreate Project's doing. We don't have that in Alberta. I don't know if we have that in Canada, to be honest. It's nothing I've heard of. So it certainly is a super organization. Yeah.
No, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And so, Dyana, in terms of the new Engage platforms that you've pulled together, is that something that you guys will continue to foster online only, or do you sort of envision having a space at some point to work with the artists that are engaging on that side of it?
Right now, we have applied for funding to expand the platform, keeping it still online at the moment, but then the long-term, very long-term vision, it is eventually to have a physical space. However, right now, I think that the aim of that platform is to really, you know, keep pushing with our values and objectives as an organization and offer a different representation within the arts, but really trying to engage partners at different levels and from different capacities. So it might be working with academia and institutions that would invite artists because they are interested in specific focus or are interested in exposing those themes with their students and their audience, or it can be a commercial art gallery, it could be non-for-profit, and it can instigate, it's just a way to really instigate new ways in which we can collaborate beyond labels, beyond markets, and really offering different type of opportunities and more opportunities to that group of artists.
And in terms of opportunities, I suppose, Holly, you've had a lot going on the last couple of months. I mean, for you specifically, what's kind of come out of your participation with the Mother Art Prize, with the commission? I mean, how have you seen your career path quite literally change in this period?
Well, I think because Procreate are working at such an integral level, they've got so much integrity, so it's not like the Mother Art Prize was quite simply a prize for women artists who'd got children. It was very much about looking at women and their responsibilities and how they work across the board. And because Procreate are working or partnering with such amazing institutions, and like Dyana was saying, academics, institutions, it really changed the nature of how the work was seen. So we did the exhibition at Cromwell Place, which happened during freeze, which was incredibly lucky given that, you know, COVID had managed to stop so many other things going on. And I can't remember the visitor statistics, maybe you can, Niamh or Dyana, but thousands of people came to see the work, and from that many things have resulted. Yeah, so, you know, that's one very positive aspect. Another aspect I think that working with Procreate has done, or looking at the way that they're approaching art and motherhood, is that being a mother really, up until recently, has been sort of considered somehow, you know, oh, that's very nice, dear, but keep it at home. This is the studio. There's been that kind of divide. And actually, when something is so vibrant and so crucial and so interesting, it should be allowed to flood through the work. And I think that that's definitely something that Procreate enable in a way. They enable that kind of creative discourse about well, you know, feminist discourses, really. And that's really lovely. So that's kind of inspired. It's very inspiring to be attached to their program and to work with them, and to feel that, to be able to have those discourses so openly, rather than making work that then might just be deemed as quirky and remarketed elsewhere. That's been really, really positive. Yeah. And I do think that reflecting on the earlier part of this conversation, that I think that COVID has definitely, I mean, being a mother is also socioeconomically determined. It means so many different things to different people, but I do think that the domesticity has really been given a good look at recently. And I think people are realizing that it's actually very, very difficult to run a home, you know, and do all the things that supposedly are just so easy for women and come so naturally, which obviously they don't. It's a complete myth. And I think that you know, it's not easy to run a studio and run a home. They're two separate entities. And I mean, I understand some people do work from home, but for me that would be impossible. I've always tried to prioritize having a studio, and to be honest, that has been at odds with having a family. You can't be in two places at the same time. It's not possible.
How would you react then? And the question is for you as well, Violet, to artists sort of like Tracey Emin who say that you do have to choose. I mean, I suppose there are particular moments where you have to, but do you think those kind of blanket statements are helpful, or are they actually kind of they cause more problems than they're worth by making statements like that, because they almost belittle those that do struggle to balance both?
Well, I think they're just reflective of the society we live in. The problem is that these artists have huge responsibility on role models and being a reference for many women artists. And of course, their words have meant a lot for many people in terms of this encouragement, or in terms of really feel casted into certain prescriptive roles even more than they would normally be. But they are very much reflective of the society we live in. The problem with it is that there is a lot of analysis and there is a lot of academic thinking about all these issues, and feminist issues, maternal feminism, within maternal feminism as well. However, there is not very much actions to change things, because we're talking about major systemic change that needs to happen in order for things to be differently than what they are describing. And a lot of people, I'm sure, a lot of organization collectives, a lot of artists coming together have tried to do so, but the longevity of it is really difficult to maintain because of the magnitude of the structural and systemic problem that we have. So I don't get angry at Tracey Emin stating that. I mean, that's for sure was her reality, and I completely kind of respect what she felt. You can't deny other people's feelings, and definitely you cannot deny the reality of the situation. But what are we going to do to change that?
And in terms of that change, I mean, obviously there's the sort of the basic things that you can identify, like studio spaces with support, changing private view openings. But in terms of more systemic change, in terms of that more sort of grassroots change, what would you identify are some of the kind of key things that can be done?
Well, what we've worked on, I think studio space is not as easy, because what you will find out is that if you want to set up a studio space with a nursery or creche on the side, it's going to be very costly and still cannot be maintaining that level of affordability that is needed for artists to be able to still access those services. And therefore, what we're looking into is the integration. So having this studio space with integrated childcare, which means that artists will be partially still be responsible for the children, but there is this level of communication between the two spaces, and there is a drop down in the costs. So, and it's still very much grassroots initiatives, because when you're looking at why certain galleries represent or not women artists, is most of the time, and I think we have discussed this in one of the events at Richard Saltoun, is because there is a huge gap in the CV, and that huge gap might represent, or in most cases represents, the lack of production because there is not provision or affordable provision for studio space and childcare. And therefore, the art of these people going back into their practices will be less valuable in terms of, art market than another person that would have continuously nurturing and exhibit their practices and keep exhibiting and being out there in the world, really. So I think that really at the grassroots level, we should look into the way that we provide studio space and the way that we embrace the presence of children in studio spaces that not necessarily formally have a childcare setting. Then we're definitely looking into how do we network, how do we create synergies between collectors, buyers, gallery managers, and really to facilitate collaborations and opportunities for artists. And a lot of this happens as well during events. So some very small things that we have done is to changing the time and the day of the private view when we worked both with Cromwell Place and Mimosa House. So how can we really look into ways that they're not following a certain script just because private view happened on Thursday at 6 p.m. Doesn't have to be that way. And that doesn't mean that then you're not part of the art world movement, but it's really making little steps that are really affordable, really feasible for different realities in the art world, but that will make a difference into an artist's life and the future of their career, really. So that's something else that can be done, and it's just so easy. Being more vocal as an art space, as an institution, be more vocal and acceptant of different artists' needs, to embrace that artists have different needs. So when you're offering a residency, when you're offering an exhibition opportunity, might be open and vocal in saying, what are your needs, how we can have you part of our program, whatever the opportunities might be. So we see examples of residencies that would accommodate families, but there is still a lot of work to be done, a lot of works in terms of length. Not everybody can afford to be from 2 months up to 2 years in some of the residency and just leave everything behind. That's not the reality, not just of people who have children, but of many other people who might not have that luxury. So I think really stepping out of this idea that the artist is this privileged white male figure would just help move towards some change that can really facilitate accessibility and integration on a larger scale.
I think there's a huge problem within that, though, playing devil's advocate, or not even devil's advocate really, is that people like having this idea of the artist as this sort of hero, this mythic person, and that actually by seeing the sort of the flaws, the kind of messiness of their personal life, they don't want to see that. They want to have this disconnect between the art object, the artist, and themselves, so that by integrating it, I think some collectors get quite kind of freaked out, get a bit nervous around it. You know, a lot of our collectors don't even like to meet the artist because they don't want the artwork almost changed by meeting the artist, because there's this, for some people, there is a disconnect, and they want to keep that disconnect. So it's a bit of a balancing act in that sense.
Well, I guess that on that, then there is this assumption that art that has to do, if you're talking about the subject matter of the art, you know, and where that artist is from. So we're looking into a work exhibited and a collector looking into it, either online or in presence. I think that there is still the fundamental assumptions that if you're a mother, you're making work about the maternal experience and a certain type of work, which is problematic. And that's why we're trying to give different type of representation and narratives, but also different type of visual representation. And I think that this Mother Art Prize was very much a part of this mission, and really kind of managed to break through those assumptions and stereotypical idea on what maternal art is. We have this really romantic idea of this figure of the mother in general in society, but very much into this idea of maternal art, and that's not the only representation that we need. We had tons of that. We had tons of that representation of the perfect mother, of this Madonna, of this like really romantic idea of this woman holding this baby and being so content of not having slept the whole night through and breastfed with, you know, with their body that is literally falling through. That's you know, it's just like it's too romantic. But a lot of it doesn't represent the reality, and it doesn't represent all the art that is out there that talks about this subject. There is a lot of abstract art that talks about these feelings and the complexity of this experience. So I think that if you're curious enough to look, and we kind of divide ourselves, we kind of drop out these preconceptions around these narratives, then we will be able to open up new perspectives, and definitely to shift those preconceptions into the collector's mind as well.
Which, speaking of, Violet, your work very much changes the kind of perception of the family unit and this idea of the perfect mother. Is it something that you consciously bring into your work, or is it just by kind of making the paintings that you make, it's just something that naturally comes out during the creative process?
Yeah, I don't think consciously it's something. It's that bringing home baby paintings, it was more thinking of like family units and how the babies are going to be affected depending on what kind of families they end up in. So yeah, not consciously, I'm not really thinking of that when I'm working.
Kind of, I just want to circle back briefly back to the OER portal itself, and back to the original question, thinking about this idea of the last year, and how you have each kind of responded to it. And I just wanted to see whether you had any kind of specific stories or kind of anecdotes around that. I mean, Dyana, we haven't really touched on it, but just in terms of the way that you guys have had, you know, the change of space, how you had to change your way of working in terms of adapting the Mother Art Prize to a purely online presence, in terms of the shortlist and everything else. How, I mean, is that something that you're going to focus on moving forward? Will you continue the Mother Art Prize in the way that it was originally conceived of, or has it permanently changed?
So I think what we will try to do in terms of model is to definitely embrace more the concept of online accessibility, but we very much like to keep the physical presence in place. And in fact, all our next initiatives and what I wrote in the last 6 months is about how do we occupy public space, how do women in collective occupy public spaces. So there are a few programs and few initiatives that are looking into it for the next months. But for what concerns the Mother Art Prize, I think we will keep the structure of the last year. There are currently this online tour of the exhibition that happened at Cromwell's Place last October, and that for us was really important because despite the 5,000 visitors over that month, we really wanted to magnify and expand the potential of the messages within that exhibition, and use the potential of the internet to really reach different audiences. So I think in the future we will definitely keep this as part of our structure, but very much keeping in mind accessibility. So really making sure that different people with different accesses to places and art, people that cannot travel to London, for example, do still have access to certain contents and to the art that we want to really promote and represent. But as well as the way that we support artists. One thing that we did this year, because of the pandemic, but we could have done it before, we thought about it just because of the conditions that we were in, is that we've organized a private tour for the artists who could then attend. And so one of the artists said it took a pandemic for people to realize that a lot of artists cannot be present at their own exhibition, and therefore an action, a gesture like that can really make a change in the way that an artist can feel supported and motivated and inspired, but also offering them that peer support and community that a simple event like a private view only dedicated to the artist and the judges in this case can create.